These are all the worksheets that we did. So for lesson 1, the economy, each student had to pretend that they were remodeling their bathroom. And in remodeling their bathroom, they had to decide, let me see if I can get one of these up here. Just this. Okay, so in remodeling their bathroom, we talked about a couple of things. Supporting your local business versus commercial business and what that means. And we kind of called it, I made these worksheets for everything. So this one was called Mom and Pop Appliances versus Home Depot. And so we had this really big discussion and the kids loved it. And they were like jumping out of their seats to answer the questions. And we talked about choosing products in a store where, you know, you can choose energy efficient products. So we talked about going green. What does it mean to go green? Do you turn green? And so the kids really got into that. And basically in the end, there's a second worksheet. I'll hold this. And for the second part, the worksheet, kids had to fill in what their choices were. So if they chose an energy efficient product, but they chose to buy it at the mom and pop store, well, they had to pay a little more money. So they had to explain why they had to pay more money. We talked about the economy as a whole and what it means to support certain businesses and not. And the kids really, you know, gained an understanding of the economy, of making choices. And so for the second part of it, they got to discuss their choices. And as I walked around the room, each group, they were having these really intense debates, you know, like, well, you know, you should pick the 10-year tiles because they'll last longer than the 5-year tiles. And like, really enjoyed it. Like, one kid said, I'm going to pick the energy efficient sink because I want to save the earth. You know, aww. They internalize these concepts. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about transformative teaching, character building, is in these kinds of activities. The next lesson was baking with multiplication. We did baking an apple tort, and we talked about sharing and how I wanted to share. I had this great recipe, but my recipe only made one tort. We need 4 torts so that everyone in the class can have a piece. How do I share? How do I make this work? And I gave out the recipes to the kids. And so they started brainstorming and problem solving. Well, we have to multiply each ingredient by 4. So then we had to do the math on the worksheet together. So here's this second worksheet. Here, apple tort recipe worksheet. And the fun thing is that I actually brought in all the ingredients. So we actually had to multiply, then we actually had to measure everything out and mix it. I took it home and baked it for them. And then the next day brought it back. And that for lesson 3 was sharing treats. And while we got to share our little treats that the class baked with multiplication, we also shared tips and tricks on multiplication. And here is the tips and tricks. What the kids did is played a game called Multiply Around the Room, where they had to each ask each other multiplication equations. And in the end, there was 4 kids in the group and there's 4 equations, so each kid had a turn. At the end, the group had to come up with a rule for how to multiply. Like, for instance, the first one is the number 0. What would be the rule for multiplying by 0? And then it goes through 1s, 2s, 4s, 5s. So each kid developed their own rules, and that was really, the classroom teacher, Mrs. Hiltz, was actually surprised because she didn't think the kids would be able to do that part of it, and they excelled at it. I mean, for the 5s, I had one group that just wrote clock math, that every time they see it on a test, they're just going to remember, think of the clock. 5 times something is a clock. So, lesson 4, multiplication and art. This is actually the big project. I followed Understanding by Design lesson planning, which says that you should have one big project in the end that kids all work together to achieve something real. And so what we decided to do was help the 3rd graders learn multiplication, and we did that through art. So we started off with coloring books from Walmart. And we kind of went through, Travis helped me, highlighting all the parts that the kids needed to trace. Okay. Then we went, and each kid, I overlaid a piece of tracing paper to it. And so each kid had to trace out their picture and put dots where it would connect the dots, and then put multiplication equations. So they would have to connect the dots. You would do 1 to 2, 2 to 3. Well, these kids were doing 1 times 1, 2 times 1, and so forth. What I did is I started out with a multiplication instruction packet where kids actually fill in and write down what their equations are. And this was actually, I thought, the best part, because it really made kids practice rote memorization without them knowing that that's what they're doing. It's all just a byway for them to get to the art part, which is the fun one. So they had to start with this. That's what I told them. And they did a phenomenal job. At the end, the whole idea was that we would take all of their pictures and put them in a book for the 3rd grade class, and the 3rd graders would then each get a cooperation multiplication activity book and help them to learn multiplication. The kids loved this activity. They had a great time, and they really loved and I put helping 3rd graders, because they loved that they were helping the younger kids. These were 4th graders, and they felt like, you know, they're doing something important. And that's what character building is about. It's about helping us to connect to one another using our intelligence. So this really kind of drove home the concept. And I'm going to pass this around, and then everyone can have a chance to start and just sort of see how the project went. Lesson 5 was Math Libs. It was, I used to struggle with word problems a lot growing up, so I wanted to make word problems fun. So we did Mad Libs, which is filling in your own blanks, filling in the numbers, filling in the names. I specifically had the kids use funny names so that it would bring some humor and creativity into it. And so the kids one kid looked at it and she said, "Are we doing word problems?" And I said, "No, we're not doing word problems. We're doing Mad Libs." And she looks at it, she goes, "What's Mad Libs?" I said, "You have to fill in the words and do it yourself." She goes, "You're making it fun." And got, you know, all excited. The class loved it. They excelled in every single learning score for every lesson. And then lesson 6, the last one, was real estate books. I was very, very low on money. I was very limited in resources, and so I had to find a lot of things that were free, and these are free at the supermarket. So I grabbed about 30 of these guys and gave them out to the kids in the class, and they just, I mean, they were like, "We get to keep them!" You know.
Anything for free.
Yeah, they just loved it. They thought it was so cool. And what they had to do was actually pick houses in the book. So they each had a budget. They had certain towns that they had to look in. And then they picked houses based on that budget. And it did include multiplication. They had to multiply their salary times 4. Because every member in their group had saved a year's salary to buy a house. So after they picked a home, they had to sell that home to their group members and get their group members to agree with it. And then for each lesson, there's this period of reflection at the end where we kind of talk about the experience. And then there's surveys and exit slips where kids wrote about their experience, and that's what I use to score their transformative learning. So this is the unit. Okay, so this is the best part, the workshop results. Each student showed an increase. The lowest increase was 4%, the highest increase was 42%. Wow. The red line represents a pretest. We did that my very first day. The moment I walked in, we just did a math pretest from the curriculum. Okay? Then on the last day, we did the unit end test, part of the curriculum. And every single kid showed a huge improvement. I mean, these first 3, the little boys that were in the class, they had hundreds on their pretest. They did a great job right from the beginning. They were actually helping other kids in the class. But then here I have resource students that are normally not in the class because they need a little bit of extra help, so they normally go to another room with a one-on-one teacher. They're just generally assumed that they're not going to do that well in the class. Well, surprise, surprise, these kids were my highest increases. This one had a 42% increase from the first test to the last test, and this one had a 37% increase. So what this shows is that transformative teaching pretty much guarantees that your student scores are going to increase. The skill that they learned doing multiplication kind of became second nature to them. It's sort of like what we said about the birdhouse. If I give you all the tools and I teach you how to use them, and I have you build a birdhouse, and then I give you a test that says, how do you use a hammer and a nails, you're going to look at me like, that's easy. And that's what happened with these kids. They were amazed at how much they learned during this workshop. And they were really proud of themselves. The overall result, I think, is actually the most telling of what this method does. Shows that there's 2 4th grade classes at Clinton Elementary School. My 4th grade class that had, or let's start with the 4th grade class that did not have transformative teaching. Their end unit score for that exact same curriculum test that we did was a 77%. My class with the students that did have transformative teaching, in the end had a 92% average. And this is overall average. The MSAD 49 curriculum goal is an 80%. When Terry, the classroom teacher, her and I met for lunch before we did this workshop, we talked about our class goals, and we said, well, you know, we know that the curriculum goal is 80%, but we really want these kids to be at like a 90. Can we do that, you know? And she was really excited about it, and I was too, to see where the kids ended up. So we actually overshot our goal. These kids learned multiplication, and they also learned how to apply it in the real world. They learned how to have fun learning, and actually began to develop character foundations from all of the lessons. And then, I think I've got some student comments. Yes, okay. So, student C2, I did use that instead of the kids' names for confidentiality. Student C2 comment analysis reflected transformative learning and character transformation. This kid wrote, I went over my budget, and this was on the economy, lesson 1. I went over my budget because I tried to purchase all my products from mom and pop appliances to support my local business. I chose the energy efficient sink to help the earth.